How's it going, YouTube? Coming in today with another video, and today, guys, the brand new is going to be where to hand trap. I get really excited when I'm able to do videos like this because I really want to make sure that everyone who doesn't have the time to go ahead and play test a ton of matches for hours on end, for those who don't have time to look into every brand new deck that's coming out, an opportunity to still be able to play the game and really have a quick knowledge base, and then also a quick refresher on a lot of the matchups that you'll be seeing the most of. Even if they're going to be older decks, they will pop up here and there, and they will be important to know exactly where to hand trap. And not only that too, is that if you don't have a hand trap, and let's say you went first and set up a couple Omni negations, then you want to know where to be able to use those. So this can also be used as a where to interrupt guide. So I really do hope that you enjoyed today's video, because we're going to be covering all the new decks and then a quick refresher on some other ones. So if you haven't already checked out my sponsors over at Imperium Duels to Dragon Shield or Gem, definitely go ahead and check them all out down in the description below. We're on our way to 20,000 subscribers, and I really do want to hit that goal. This is going to be an amazing celebration. The giveaway that I have planned is absolutely insane. So once we hit that goal, I can go ahead and move that giveaway forward, and I'm going to be very excited to do so. So let's hop right on into our first slide. The first thing that I want to talk about today is going to be Purrely. Now, Purrely is a deck that is definitely something that a lot of people are looking at right now, because in the OCG, this deck is killing it. But what is it going to do in the TCG? And that's something that we really have to figure out when it actually comes over. But we already have the deck, but not really, because we don't have Lily, we don't have Sleeping Memory, so it's really just not the same deck at all. But once we get those brand new cards in Cyac, you're really going to want to know where to hand trap this deck. So the first thing that I want to talk about is going to be Lily. Now, this card on the left here is really crazy. Allowing you to search a non-quick play Purrely card is really effective. Being able to get My Friend Purrely, the field spell, or the trap card, all very good targets. If you don't open with one of them, you specifically want to get to either like My Friend or the trap card. If you open with one of them, then having two of the unsearchable cards outside of Lily is really effective. Having like trap field spell or having like My Friend trap, it's just an amazing combination and really does help moving forward with your game plan. But there is a lot of ways to go ahead and shut this down. Ash on Lily effect to add. You can also Ash My Friend Purrely, whichever one you see first. If it's Lily or My Friend Purrely, you should be ashing whichever one you see first. Valor Imperm, you definitely want to use on Lily, because Lily is a 1-card Exceed versus Purrely, which is a 2-card Exceed, because you do need a spell in hand to attach to Purrely. So that's something that you really want to keep in mind. But Valor Imperm to shut down the effect of search, and then also force your opponent to get another Lily on the board. That's going to be really effective, because then they have to trade if they want to go for the Air Zero effect of Purrely, or if they specifically want to get another Lily on the board to try to go for an Exceed again. The other thing too is that you can use the Ghost Ogre as well on the effect of Lily to go ahead and attach and summon, which will just clear the effect to summon, and then also they won't get it again because Lily is a hard once per turn, unlike Purrely, so that's already going to be really great already. You can also use DD Crow on Lily's effect if you go ahead and target the spell that they target with Lily, because this effect does apply on resolution, so if the spell is not there at the time of resolution of Lily's effect, Lily will not be able to summon an Xyz. Moving forward though, if you do have Ogre when your opponent uses the effect of My Friend Purrely, go ahead and just use Ogre on that, because it's very similar to the second effect of Pantheism of the Monarchs, where you can go ahead and reveal 3 cards. They don't have to be different names either, which is already pretty crazy. So this is definitely a very good spot to use Ghost Ogre. And then overall, using Droll on this deck is going to be very effective. I do want to give you a tip though. If you use Gameciel or another Kaiju on Purrely, note that the effect of the field spell and the continue spell to recur and E-Telly will be live. If you use Herald of the Abyss, they will not get their effects because the player is sending the card and it's not your opponent's card sending the monster. So that's going to be really important going into this deck, and you really got to know that. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and look at the next new deck that we're receiving, and that's going to be Manadome. Now, Manadome is a really interesting deck, and there's actually a lot of very clean ways that you can just interrupt this combo completely. So the number one way that you really want to go ahead and shut down the combo is if they open with the Hero Lives, ash it immediately, because that's going to get to Prisma, and that's going to be an insane effect to go ahead and put up a lot of negates. The other way is going ahead and using Valor or Imperm on Prisma. If you ever see a Hero Lives or Prisma first, you always have to interact with the card, because especially if they use Prisma effect on board and you Ghost Ogre, a lot of times they're just gonna pass, which is pretty crazy. So this is very similar to Lady Debug back when Salad first came out. If you hit Debug with Ogre, they just passed. This is the same thing. The other thing to keep in mind though, if your opponent opens up with a Riem Heart, you still want to Imperm or Valor the Riem Heart because they can still get the really free advantage like Obsidian. But if they use the effect of Riem Heart on board and you don't have Valor or Imperm, but you have Ghost Ogre, I definitely recommend to go ahead and use it. Why would you use it? Because your opponent can't summon the level 2s from hand without controlling a 1500, 2100. So definitely go ahead and just use Ghost Ogre. This is another amazing way to just make your opponent pass turn. The other thing too is that if your opponent has Cross Sheep already up and they go to Reborn the Prisma, definitely go ahead and DD Crow the Prisma. Before that's able to happen, your opponent's going to have to summon Vicious Shroud to go ahead and use the effect of Cross Sheep. So you're definitely going to want to use DD Crow on one of the heart monsters in the graveyard that have 1500, 2100, or just using DD Crow on Vasas Starfrost. Either or, it doesn't really matter, especially if they go into like Disbatter, they can bring it back later on, but this still makes the play very awkward, and there is not a whole lot that they can do at the moment. Depending on their hand, they're going to have to combo kind of weird to get back to where they want to be. So this isn't going to be an amazing interaction, but it's going to be something that will definitely be worthwhile if you just have DD Crow to go ahead and banish one of the two here. Moving on to the next slide here, I have Rikka Sunavalon. This is a deck that definitely still pops up, and you definitely have to know how to stop it. So the first thing I want to talk about is going to be the two targets that you want to go ahead and use Valor, Imperm, or Ash on. That's going to be Rikka Petal or the Jasmine. If you see your opponent starting off with the Sun Avalon line, then you usually want to wait until your opponent has Jasmine and then goes ahead and tributes the monster off for cost. And then you can Valor, Imperm, or Ash the effect. And then otherwise, if your opponent opens up with the Petal play, just go ahead and use any one of the three on Petal so your opponent doesn't have access to their whole engine. The other thing is that if your opponent uses the effect of Rikka Con to go ahead and set like a Sheet or a Glamour, you want to go ahead and use Ghost Ogre to prevent that and then get this card off the field so a lot of their cards aren't as potent into your board, especially if your opponent's going second and then you have Ghost Ogre to go ahead and shut down the field spell. That's going to be huge because their board break potential goes way down. The other thing is that if you have DD Crow, use it on Petal so they can't keep recurring Petal, or just use it on Princess right away so you don't have to worry about Princess during your turn. The next thing here though is going to be Runick Naturia. This is a deck that we've definitely seen become very popular, and this is something that you want to know how to shut down. Another one of those interactions that's not going to be super crazy, but it's still going to be pretty good, is using Ghost Ogre on Camilla, just because you want to make sure this card's off the board. And then it's also really important too, because your opponent's just going to summon Hugin so they can go into Charge Warrior and then bring back Camilla anyways, and then go into their Baron. So if you can make your opponent waste more cards to just summon a Baron, you really want to. And again, it's like one of those things where if you have Ghost Ogre in your hand, you might as well use that on something that is going to be semi-worthwhile, because you're almost never going to use that on Fountain, especially because they can chain a quick play and there's some Hugin protect Fountain anyway. So if you go ahead and just destroy the Camilla, a lot of times it's going to make their playlines a lot more awkward too. The other thing too, this has been pretty common with Runick Fountain, you want to use Ash or Bell on the effect to put back and draw, so your opponent can't get a lot of free advantage. Valor or Imperm on the Camilla effect to go ahead and send, and then also doesn't allow your opponent to get the effect to just mill cards instead of being able to tribute things as cost, like a Cricket or the Sunflower. And then also on Hugin, of course, just because you don't want your opponent being able to get to Fountain as soon as possible. That card's pretty crazy, so you don't want them to get a lot of free draws. And then overall, using Droll is going to be very effective into this matchup. You really just have so many ways to get searches here, alongside the Sacred Tree, the Fountain for the draws. Droll is just going to be a very surefire way to go ahead and shut a lot of that down. These are some interactions too that you want to consider. Bell on the effect of Cricket to summon back to the board, or on Blessing, because this card's pretty nice too, being able to summon from the hand or graveyard. It doesn't specify which one, so you can Bell just because it's included in the effect. And then Ash and Valor on the Cricket and Grave, or trying to summon from deck, is still going to be very effective as well, so your opponent can't get out the Sunflower or go into another Camilla to extend their plays. The other thing too that I want to talk about is going to be Superheavy Samurai. This is a deck that a lot of people have talked about and a lot of people are really anticipating for the new set. But there is an interaction in here that I definitely want to cover because I want to make sure that no one loses to things that they shouldn't lose to. So that's going to be the Monk Warrior. You're going to want to drop your Ogre on that instead of the new level 4 Pendulum that activates Monk from deck. Because of the fact that Gamma is going to be so common in Superheavy Samurai, you really want to make sure that you're getting max value for your cards. So you don't want to risk getting hit with Gamma, especially if you're in top cut. You just don't want to take unnecessary risks. And this is something else that not only clears the other scale, so it makes it really awkward to try and pendulum summon, but it also is able to shut down the search that the monk is going to do. So you gain a ton of value because your opponent's not able to get to their Soul Piercer, or if they need to get to like the Peacemaker, this is going to be something that you really want to make sure that you're doing. Again, it just plays around Gamma, and that's something that you're going to be doing a lot next format. Yeah, they can summon out the new level 4 Pendulum that allows you to summon from deck, but your opponent's also locked into Superheavy Samurais for the turn, and that doesn't really do you a whole lot. So definitely go ahead and use Ogre on the Monk instead of using it on the new level 4 Pendulum. That is going to be one of the biggest pieces of information that I can give you. I really think that that's super punishable by Gamma. That will probably make you auto lose. That will allow your opponent to go right into a Cell Synchron, bring back Gamma, and go into Baron. So it's definitely something that you want to just wait and hit the second scale for. The other thing too is that your opponent with the Link 1 is going to try and reborn the Soul Piercer. So when they use the effect of the Link 1 to reborn the Soul Piercer, you want to go ahead and just DD Crow it. The Link 1 is very strong, so you definitely want to make sure that you have a Veiler or an Imperm to shut this down as well. Again, just being able to summon back the Soul Piercer, get rid of it, get more searches. And this is usually where you see the search for like a Peacemaker. This is something that you definitely want to cut off early. Then also using Ash on the Peacemaker is going to be very solid because this does tribute itself and the Link 1 for cost. But you want to make sure that there's still a monster on the board, because if there's not, then it might be a little awkward if they have that Gamma. And that's something that you really got to keep in mind. Usually it's going to be fine where they won't have the option to Gamma, because if you already have the level 4 Pendulum on the board after you summon it and then activate Monk, then there's not a way for them to hit you with Gamma. But this is just if they are in a really awkward position and then tribute the Peacemaker and the Link 1, you want to make sure that you are not playing into these hand traps. And that's really going to be the biggest difference between you winning that game and you losing that game. There's another way too where, like, if you allow your opponent to use the Peacemaker effect and then get rid of the Link 1, they're going to go into Superheavy Samurai Scales to reborn a Soul Piercer, and that's when you can actually go ahead and Bell. So that's something else too where Bell could be really effective. It would be a very niche interaction if all went wrong, but it's still a better interaction than getting Gamma'd. Again, in Top Cut, this is something where you're probably going to play against a lot of Super Heavy Samurai, and you really want to make sure that you play around as many hand traps as possible. So again, playing around Gamma, when they summon the level 4 Pendulum and then use the effect of Monk and Search, that's when you droll. That's something that's really important. This is going to be a huge format of Gamma and Droll. They are going to be absolutely everywhere. So make sure that you are prepared for that, because they are not forgiving when you get hit by either of those. Again, either free Barons or you get hit with Droll and then it's the end of the turn. So definitely make sure that you are aware of both of those and do your best to play around both of those. Talking about branded, especially next format, it's really interesting because they have a new fusion that acts just like Expulsion, but there is another key piece that the deck is going to start using, and that's going to be Nadir Servant. And so this is something that you want to keep in mind, because yes, Ash is always for branded fusion. That'll never change. You'll always use Ash and branded fusion. I don't care what your opponent's doing, just wait for branded fusion. Unless it's a really awkward late game situation. But even then, most of the time, I'm still just waiting for branded fusion. The other thing that you can do, though, is if your opponent is on Expulsion, obviously you're always going to Bell Expulsion, no doubt about it. But if your opponent uses a Nadir Servant, that's where you're going to want to bell, because Not Your Servant allows you to play quite a lot even if you do get hit with Ash on Brand Diffusion. So this is going to be the next layer to the deck that you want to make sure that you have some kind of coverage for. So if you have Bell, use that Not Your Servant. Your opponent's going to try and dump the Synchro to the graveyard, or so many different options that they have as well. So definitely be on the lookout for that. Crow on the Albion in the grave before end phase, of course, so they can't use the effect on the branded and red target, the branded banishment target, and then as always, Imperm Veiler on the Aluber. If your opponent opens up branded fusion though, and then they dump the Lubellion and they dump Fallen of Albaz, go into Albion, and they try to use the effect of fusion, that's another spot where you can Veiler Imperm. It just depends on what your opponent opens first, but most of the time you're just going to use it on Aluber, because even if you have Imperm Ash, you want to make sure that your opponent can't get to things like branded Lost, because that card is still really crazy. So just go ahead and hit the Aluber with an Imperm, and then Ash the brand diffusion. Moving forward though, we have Exosister. Exosister has already been a part of our meta for a while, and so this is actually going to be really important to know though, is that we're getting the spirit monster in the new set that allows you to reveal itself in hand and normal summon. If you make a Caspatel with 2 monsters that are not Exosister, the mandatory effect on the card doesn't happen, and so that's a spot where you cannot Ogre, so they still get to search for Martha. That being said, you still want to go ahead and Ogre the card just so your opponent can't make Magnifica, but at the same point, just be aware that if your opponent uses 2 spirit monsters instead of the Exosisters, then your opponent will not even gain the effect to use the mandatory effect on field of the Caspatel. So that's going to be really important to know. But again, using Ghost Ogre on either of these just so they're off the board, and then using Veiler or Imperm on the Caspatel so your opponent can't search the Martha, and then just ashing Martha almost 95% of the time. But also, if you're playing and your opponent has a set card, you're just going to hold Ash for the Vadis. It's just the easiest way to make sure that your opponent can't do literally anything on your turn. But that is a really important thing to know with the new spirit cards, and that's why I think that the deck gets a little bit better, just because they have a bit more guarantee to get to their Martha versus getting hit with Ogre and being like, well, so definitely interesting. But moving forward into Kashtira, we don't have to spend a lot of time on this just because Kashtira is what it is. Hopefully if this deck gets hit after this ban list, we don't have to really worry about it as much. But using Ash on Prosperity, I think this is just fine. Using Ash on Theosis always just seems really lackluster. You can Ash the Unicorn, it's like okay, but I'd rather just use Veiler or Imperm on Unicorn and Ash things like Prosperity, because Prosperity is going to be the card that always helps the deck unbrick itself. We've been seeing a lot of Prosperity and Desires, and that really does show you how important the pot cards are in this deck. So whatever pot card you see, just go ahead and Ash it immediately just so your opponent can't net more advantage. And then if your opponent uses the effect of Birth, then of course go ahead and just use Ogre on Birth so your opponent doesn't get all of the great effects that go with that. Birth is honestly such a crazy card, and it's probably one of the best in the archetype, so definitely want to make sure that you have Ogre for that. And then last but not least, we have Dark World. This is something that I just wanted to mention again because I've been hearing a lot about it. You're going to see under Ghost Ogre that we have Appaloosa, and this is because this is a very forgotten about interaction. But Dark World usually tries to go for an Appaloosa as soon as possible. But if you have 2 hand traps like a Veiler and an Ogre, let's say that your opponent already has an Oppo up and then they have a Dugaris that they want to resolve, you can go ahead and use Veiler on the Dugaris. Your opponent will use Appaloosa to negate the Veiler, and then you'll chain the Ogre. Your opponent will not be able to have their Appaloosa lose 800 attack once it's destroyed by Ogre, so therefore the Appaloosa will not be able to negate the Veiler, and then your Veiler is free to go through. So yes, using Ogre on Appaloosa is still an amazing interaction that you really want to be aware of. Using Ogre on the field spell, still really solid. Using Ash on Genta, that's another one that you really want to be aware of. Just really cutting off the access to the field spell, and then once they get field spell, being able to reborn the Genta as well, something that you really don't want to happen. Using Veiler or Imperm on the Dugaris, again, free draws, free pitches from the hand, something that you definitely don't want to happen. Overall, using Droll on this deck is just a pass turn from Dark World as well. But lastly, if you want your opponent to not be able to grind at all, you definitely want to hit the Grapha with the DD Crow. But also, you can go ahead and hit Purrely with DD Crow, and then your opponent can't rip literally anything out of your hands. So definitely really cool as well. And Dark World only ever runs one Purrely, so Using DD Curl in this is a surefire way to make sure that your hand stays in your hand. I do hope that you enjoyed today's video. Again, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, definitely go ahead and do so as we push for 20,000 subscribers. It's going to be such an amazing giveaway. I'm so excited to do that, and 20,000 is going to be surreal. If you haven't already checked out my Discord, definitely go ahead and do that. A ton of playtesting that goes on daily, and I definitely want to grow the community as much as possible. So go ahead down in the description below, check out my Discord and hang out. And then if you haven't already checked out my Twitch, my Twitter, my Instagram, they're all down in the description below. If you want a coaching session over on Medify, definitely PM me on Discord if you have any questions. Then I hope that everyone has a wonderful night. Thank you.